getting ready to film. And Luna's here with me. Hi, Luna Bear. You're a good doggy. Hello friends, for today's video I thought it'd be fun to do a random mix of things. So this is going to be partially a reading vlog where I go through a new favorite from this year, a reread and a previous favorite, and then also a little discussion about a nonfiction I read. And also I did recently go to another location of one of my favorite bookstores, Bookman's. A lot of you have heard me talk about Bookman's so many times because most often when I do book hauls, I get my books through my local bookstores, Bookman's being the main one. And they do have multiple locations throughout the area I live in. And recently, because of the fact that it's fall, I really wanted to go to a pumpkin patch, which I know this seems random. It's tied to the bookstore, I promise. So I've never been to a pumpkin patch. So this year, when October came around, I told my husband, I was like, hey, do you want to go to a pumpkin patch with me? And he was like, you've never been to a pumpkin patch? It doesn't matter. Anyway, we went to a pumpkin patch, and specifically I wanted to go to one that was very charming and had a lot of character. There's a lot of farmland in the area I'm in, surprisingly, even though Phoenix is a really big city. On the outskirts of the city, there's a fair amount of farmland, like the area I grew up is a lot of farming and things like that. So there are a lot of pumpkin patches in those farm areas. But because it's actually still pretty hot right now, frustratingly, where I live, we decided to go to Flagstaff, Arizona, which is much cooler. It's more in the mountains. And there is a flower garden that converts to a pumpkin patch for the fall season. And I was like, let's go there. We can make a day trip of it and we can just have fun with the cooler weather, and then maybe while we're there, we can stop by the bookstore. So that's what we did, and I thought it'd be fun to bring you along. I love this time of year. I love the coziness of it. I love that in certain areas, leaves are changing, and the season really starts to settle in, because in the city where I live at, it's not really a thing in the valley in Arizona. So it was nice to get out of the city. I thought it'd be fun to bring you along, and also discuss, like I said, some of the books I've been reading. So I will say I did have to re-record this intro, so I've actually already read the things that I'm going to talk about. So I'll just mention them here, and then at the end of the video, I'll recap my thoughts on those things. But I just wanted to be transparent to not try to feel like I'm tricking you or something, which I don't think anybody would care anyway, but I have already read them. So we'll talk about that after. The books would be Warbreaker by Brandon Sanderson. This is part of the Cosmere read-along that I've been doing, and we will be having a discussion video very soon, and then I'll also have that eventually go up here on the channel. The live shows themselves are for patrons to participate in, and then the replays go up here on the channel. So everybody has access to it, but if you want to participate in the chat, you can do so at any tier level over on Patreon. So that chat will have already happened by the time this video goes up. Then the replay will be available. We have left the last two books that are out so far of Stormlight, which would be Oathbringer and Rhythm of War. And the same day we're recording the discussion for Warbreaker, we'll also have the discussion for Secret Project 4. I have a lot of thoughts about that one, but I'll save that for both the discussion and a separate video. And then that will be it for the main releases of the Cosmere. That's kind of exciting. Doesn't seem like we've gotten through so many of his works, but we have, and I can't wait to chat. Stormlight's just amazing, so I can't wait to chat about those. But regardless, Warbreaker I wanted to get to before Oathbringer and Rhythm of War, so that was the reason for the timeline of that. Even though it's a manga, I did want to talk about Hat Atelier a little bit more. I talk about manga and then other things, video games, comics, TV shows, over on my side channel, Full Meta Analysis. But I do want to highlight Hat here a little bit more, just because I think it's fantastic. And I know some people aren't as interested in those other things over from that channel, and so maybe you're not really interested in checking those out, but I know some of you like manga, and if you're willing to give manga a try, at the very least, this is worth checking out for the art alone, but I do want to talk about it a little bit more here, so we'll talk about that, like I said, at the end of the video. And then I read Killers of the Flower Moon. A lot of you probably, that sounds familiar because there is a movie that is out now with Leonardo DiCaprio, Robert De Niro, that a lot of people I'm sure have seen buzz around or have seen trailers for. And my husband read the book with his dad. They buddy read it because they do a buddy read every month. And Sean was telling me, you should definitely check this book out. It's great. And I thought, okay, well, let me fit it in before we go see the movie. And If I can, I will do a movie discussion over on that side channel with some friends of mine and Sean. Sean and I have a lot of thoughts about the book and the movie. Really, really, really highly recommend the book. The movie, if you've read the book, I think it highlights just how much is missing from the movie, unfortunately. Not to say the movie is shot poorly or anything like that. The acting was great, but I just don't think they really told the full story in the movie. So it's kind of scratching the surface. I almost wonder if we hadn't read the book first, if we'd have thought better of the movie. And I'm not even one of those people that always insists that the book was better, because sometimes certain stories really do work in other forms. But in this scenario, if I had to recommend one over the other, hands down, the book. So we'll get into that a little bit more. Before doing that, let's get to the other things that I mentioned. I ended the last clip talking about Killers of the Flower Moon, so I'll go ahead and start with that one. If you don't know the story whatsoever, it is nonfiction, everything is factual, and it follows the murders of the Osage people and how much there was that went into taking advantage of them, trying to, certain individuals in America trying to marry into family so that they could inherit the immense amount of wealth that the Osage had, and just in general, the atrocities that were committed against the Osage, and the amount of manipulation and intricacy in the deception is sickening, and just how deep everything went, it is baffling, but also at the same time expected, because that is an unfortunate part of history. So it's not like it was baffling in that it happened. It was baffling just the level at which people were willing to be so cruel and so deceptive for money, for wealth. And the movie really doesn't highlight how thorough of an investigation was that took place to discover and unveil everything. But the book highlights really well at the beginning all of the fear that has been sown into this community of people, how there's so many people being murdered, nobody's doing anything about it. The second it seems like there's any kind of private investigator looking into something, or the moment that it seems like, well, maybe somebody from the state will start to get involved, then suddenly something happens to that person, or that person doesn't seem to care that much, or they just disappear, and it just shows how helpless they are and how nobody seems to be paying attention, nobody seems to care. And then Hoover, because Hoover actually at this time was sort of starting the FBI. It was sort of the beginnings of the FBI being formed. He had really wanted to solve these murders, to prove himself. And it is really fascinating how they go about it, because he ends up sort of recruiting this old school sort of sheriff from Texas group of people. And the man's name, who it seemed like was very principled and very dedicated to solving these crimes, was a man named Tom White, I believe was his name. And like I said, once the investigation starts and he starts to unearth everything, it's not just enough to have the facts and to have evidence on your side. You now have to combat the corruption and how much the person who was really manipulating everything, the schemer behind all these plans, you really start to see how much they truly have everybody under their influence. And it is almost bizarre that it's true, because it feels like movie deception. It feels like a TV show where you have this mastermind, cruel person who's manipulating and presenting a false front to everybody. So it starts with setting everything up, making you invested in what is going on, and then also you wanting this person to get caught and you wanting this person to get taken down. And then there's the fact that state government versus the federal government and where the trials were going to be taking place, that plays into things because of if a murder took place on Native American land versus if it did not, then it determines where a person can be tried. And you want it in this scenario to be the federal government, not the state, because the state, there's corruption. And so you're just like, man, the second you feel like, okay, we're going to get this guy, then there's all these other layers that these people have to try to push through. It was riveting. It was incredibly gripping. It did a great job highlighting how awful this scenario was and how much it took to take these people down and make sure that there was justice. So highly recommend the book. It's also quite short. It's very to the point. And you can, for me at least, I had a hard time finding the audiobook available on library apps and things like that, which is usually how I like to listen to nonfiction. But in this case, if you have an audiobook subscription, I would just recommend using one of your credits to listen to this book because it was great. Or of course, physical copy works too. I just know that right now it's hard to get hands on a physical copy because a lot of people are picking it up with the movie coming out. But if you can find a way to read this book, you definitely should. And I will be very curious to see when my friends do go watch the movie what their thoughts are, because one of them has read the book and the other one has not. And then me and Sean have read the book. So it will be interesting to see if that plays a role in how much we liked the movie. In my opinion, the movie, I did not like the focus on the character Ernest. I say character, it was a real person, but I think you know what I mean. I didn't like the emphasis on him. I feel as though it wasn't his story. I didn't like that we showed so much of him because to me, I keep using the word deception, but the level of deception from the people that are really just trying to make some money off of the Osage, the level of deception is so intense that I almost think it does a disservice to not present how intricate their planning was, because in the movie, they just lay it all out at the very beginning. And it was almost, I don't like using the word masterful because I don't like complimenting horrible people, but it just was so intense and it went so deep that I think it did a disservice a little bit in the movie to not depict it as such. In the movie, it's very much like, look how obvious it is that these people are horrible right from the start, so you know the mystery, and when the investigation starts, it's basically just like, hey, by the way, did you know anything that was going on here? And people are like, no. And then it's pretty much like, we're gonna bring in and we're gonna see if that's true. And then it's like things are solved now. Like, there's no real emphasis on the investigation. I shouldn't say there's no emphasis. There's very little on. It's kind of like tacked on at the end. And also, for so much of the movie, it's so focused on the character of Ernest. And I'm like, I would have liked it to be more focused on the Osage, I think. So I don't think the movie was a horrible movie by any means, but I do think that the book really goes a lot deeper than the movie, which I was expecting the movie to be one of my new favorites, because it was, I really, really was appreciating this story being told, and there's so much to it, and the movie from the trailers looked phenomenal, so I was expecting it to be one of my new favorite movies of all time, and it just let me down a little bit in the areas of focus. So if you do see the movie, I'm very curious. Hopefully you enjoy it more. But I would love to know if you do see it, if you've read the book, let me know your thoughts. And if you haven't read the book, let me know your thoughts, because I would love to see if there's kind of like a general consensus between the two. Okay, anyway, I've talked about that a lot. So getting into some fiction now. I want to talk about Witch Hat Atelier. I've mentioned this a couple times on this channel. I did do a couple spoiler chats for it over on FMA, and if I can, I might want to do a dedicated video just talking about the series. It's not complete, it's not even close to being complete, and it takes a while for each new volume to come out, which is why I've been like, oh, do I talk about it in depth right now or not? So we'll see. But regardless, the setup for this story is you follow this young girl named Coco who has always dreamed of having magic and being a witch. However, she believes that you have to be born with these abilities, and she does not have them. And she just lives in this kind of rural area with her mom. And then this witch comes into town, and his name is Kifri, and he just seems so larger than life and so sweet and kind, and he seems to use his magic for good. And then Coco witnesses him using magic in a way that she should not have seen, and it kind of opens her eyes to a lot more of the world of magic. And once this happens, Kifri sort of takes her under his wing, and then the story goes from there. And there's also some very sad things that happen at the beginning that are sort of catalysts for part of why Kifri takes her under his wing. But I don't want to reveal those things because I do think that it would take away the impact of the opening. So the opening starts out very whimsical, and it seems like it's going to be this sweet little story following this little girl learning about magic. And that's not untrue, that is part of the story, but as it progresses, there's so many deeper themes explored in this. There's a lot to do with class in a bizarre way. There's a lot to do with privilege, maybe is a better way to put it. And when certain people are offered opportunities that others are not, and what we do with the privileges that we have, and how we actually implement what we can do into the lives of other people, and how much we really try to make the world a better place versus just enjoying our life and sort of turning an eye to the struggles of others. There's also a lot of moral conundrums that come up in this series that you're like, I kind of sort of understand the bad guys' views right now. And I also think the good guys are good, though, so I don't know how to feel about this. And I really like that it doesn't have everything so black and white. And then on top of all of that, the artwork, I cannot hype up the art enough. I think the only manga I've picked up, and they're completely different art styles, so I want to be clear about that, but the only other art that I just sit and like, wow, that art is so good, and I just stare at the panels, would be Vagabond. And again, those are very different because Vagabond is much more realistic looking, and this just looks magical and whimsical. And the creativity in this, because it is fantasy, whereas Vagabond is historical fiction. So there's a lot more that you can kind of go anywhere that your mind wants to go, as far as the artist anyway. So she really does a great job doing that in the art. It's so good. It's wholesome, but it's also heartbreaking, heart-wrenching. There's some gut punches in this. And like I said, there's some moral conundrums that come up. You do have to give it a little bit of time before some of those deeper themes start to present themselves, because it is going to feel just like what I talked about before, the little girl learning about magic. But man, there's even some conversations about the guidance of an adult on a child, and the way that you can inflict trauma, or you can really help foster a sense of like love and community and trust in children, and trying to model that for children. And that can be kind of dark. Everything is done in a way, though, where it's not like there's ever anything extremely graphic. It's sort of alluded to and touched on, but clearly you can gather from the hints that are laid out for you, what is being referenced. It's phenomenal. This latest volume, I think that I thought more was going to happen based off of where the previous volume left off, and it didn't quite, it just feels like we're still going to have some of the issues presented before. They're not going to be resolved anytime soon, is what it feels like. And we're not even a little bit resolving them at the moment. This one was a little bit more wholesome than I was expecting, given where the previous one left off. But there was still a moment where I was like, wow, people suck. There's a part in this where I don't want to reveal too much, but a character is trying to show how magic can be used to help people. And it would just take the tiniest of, like, insignificant amount of time for somebody to do one thing that it's like, oh, all you have to do when you, I feel like I'm being really vague, so I'm just gonna say it's kind of like recycling, where it's like instead of throwing something in this trash can, you throw it in this trash can. It's not what's happening exactly, but it gives you an idea. So it's literally just like, all you have to do is this, and it will clean the world, it will make the world better, it will make it better for people who live in the slums, who have to deal with all this trash and muck and everything gross, and people are like, wait a sec, I have to do this one extra step. I don't want to have to do that. And I'm like, ugh, it's exactly how people are. And it does it in such a good way where I'm like, gosh darn it, this series. So that might seem like a really random, subtle thing to mention, but that's one of the parts that I was like, of course. There had to be that, like, just don't people suck sort of moment in this, which I liked a lot. The art is so good. I don't know if I can share too much of the art just because of copyright reasons, but you can tell just from looking at the various different covers of this series that the art is phenomenal. Highly recommend it. It's so good. So good. One of my favorite manga that I have picked up, and I always eagerly await the next installment, so can't wait for the next one. Last, Warbreaker. So Warbreaker for a long time has been one of my favorite adult fantasy standalones, just favorite standalones in general, and I really like the tone of Warbreaker. It's a lot more fun. When I started the Cosmere, like a lot of people, I started with Mistborn, which can be very doom and gloom. Obviously, Stormlight Archive has some very devastating moments, and there's a huge emphasis on mental health, so you really dive deep into people's minds and trauma. Warbreaker is a little bit more on the fun side. It's very colorful, it's very creative in its magic, and it is rather political, so there's a lot of twists and turns. You're trying to decipher, when that person said this, did they mean this? Is this what they're talking about? Can we trust this person? Which I always like in books. And the magic has to do with something called breaths. Every person has a breath, which some people think is their soul. If they part ways with their breath, they can still live, so it's not something that's going to kill them, but the more breaths you have, because you can give your breath to someone else, the more breaths you have, the more you kind of heighten to these different tiers, and the higher of a tier you are, the more that you actually have powers associated with the breaths. You can give life to inanimate objects temporarily. You can give them commands. They don't necessarily gain a conscience, although that is something that's explored, and that's a lot of people's one of their favorite parts of Warbreaker. But you can sort of make something come to life, and then you can call those breaths back to you. There are certain people called returned, who are beings who died, came back to life. They have to be given breaths every week in order to live, and the idea is that someday they will give their breaths up to someone in need, someone who moves them, that they feel it is their duty to help this person. But in the meantime, they live lives of luxury. They're seen as gods by some people. And there's a lot of intricacies with what's going on in their court. And they have their own king, who's the god king. And the setup is that we have another kingdom who views their ways as they think they're heathens. But in order to maintain peace, they have to fulfill this marriage alliance. And a character named Vivenna was supposed to fulfill this marriage alliance. However, her father sends her younger sister in her place. Her younger sister's name is Ciri. Ciri has never been prepared for this, and so she does not know what she's gotten herself into or what her father's gotten her into. And Vivenna decides, I have to rescue my poor, innocent younger sister. And Vivenna also has no idea how to how to go about rescuing someone, and so she falls into a lot of traps, and Siri is just bumbling around trying to figure out what's going on in her area in the courts. And then you do get sprinkles of some other characters. You have one of the Return named Lightsong, who doesn't really believe in his own divinity, and then you have another character named Vasher who shows up, who just seems like this mysterious, interesting person who has more of an understanding of the magic than everyone else, and he seems more capable with the magic than everyone else. And then what I referenced before about the object having more sentience, that also comes into the picture with his perspective. And the first time I read this book, I was gripped. I loved it. Like I said, I loved the tone and how different it was from some of the other Cosmere books I'd read. I do think rereading it, while I still enjoyed those elements, a lot of the fun of this book for me was the reveals and the twists and turns and trying to decipher who is wanting what and why. And already having known all that information, it sort of did take away a little bit. I have found with my rereads of the Cosmere, like Mistborn, I've reread multiple times. I love it. There's different things I love about it each time. Stormlight, definitely have been enjoying it even more on reread. This is the first one I think that I enjoyed maybe a little less. So the rereadability, I think, is not as strong with this one, but that doesn't mean that I think it's bad by any means. It doesn't mean that I no longer like it. I just think as a reread, it was a little less enjoyable. And I'm curious if you've reread Warbreaker, if you feel similarly, or if you've read books that have that more mystery component to them, if you feel similarly. When you do pick them up, do you find that you're not as engaged as you were maybe the first time, and that mystery is gone? I want to pinpoint too that because the mystery is gone, the characters themselves, if they were really characters I connected with or characters that we explored deeply, it might not matter to me. I do think something like the Well of Ascension, there's a mystery component to the Well of Ascension, and I love the characters so much that knowing already what the answer is and the reveal, it wasn't like that ruined the book, because I still was so impacted by other things. I still cared about the characters so much, their growth and their development, and I think see it and understand it even better on reread. Whereas in this, the characters themselves, I don't know that I'm super attached to any of them. I think maybe I enjoyed Siri's perspective actually the most. Vivenna, the first time I read it, annoyed me, and rereading it again, she still annoyed me, but she does have a lot of growth throughout the book. So in a weird way, the whole time I'm like, can we just get to the part where she's like not as annoying anymore and as like stuck up and dumb? And that's not really fair, but it's just kind of how I felt. I was like just waiting for her to get to that aha sort of moment. I did forget how much she has to go through to get there, so I did kind of feel bad for her. But point is, I'm just not as attached and in love with these characters like I am some of the other characters in the Stormlight Archive and in Mistborn. So not as much of a favorite anymore. But it doesn't mean that it's not still one of those books that I really love, if that makes any sense. But anyway, that's it for this really long, hopefully fun vlog. I guess you could call it. It's kind of a hybrid of a lot of different things. I would love to know your thoughts on the books. I hope your change of season has been going well. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.